Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome from Berlin. My name is Gernot Wolfram. I'm working here in Berlin as a professor for media management and arts management. I've worked over a long period of time as an arts manager, and I'm still involved in a lot of projects and festivals, and it's really an honor to speak to you for this freelancer conference in Tunisia. Unfortunately, this time, I cannot be in Tunis. It's really a sad thing, but hopefully we see us personally in October. But nevertheless, I will use the opportunity to speak to you from Berlin, far away from you, through this video. And I want to greet you all, say thank you for the invitation. And let's speak for a minute about the term freelancer in a cultural environment and about the very different and perhaps also complicated situation you have in your country. This is perhaps very important when you, as a European scientist and professor for arts management, talk about this topic, to make clear there are huge differences. Tunisia is a country in transition. You did a very impressive revolution there, and I know from a lot of friends and colleagues, because I'm working regularly in North Africa, that this is a hard situation. And therefore I admire the passion, the enthusiasm you're working on your future goals. I don't have so much time, but perhaps let me talk for a minute about my research and the research of my colleagues. I also invited today three freelancers from Berlin, Mafalda Santrini, Rosella Sazzillo, and Alan Tabakovic, and at the end you will see them. They helped me to prepare this little lecture, and perhaps we can talk all together in October about our experiences and what it means to work as a freelancer in a cultural environment. Perhaps if you look for a minute on this slide, you see here the sentence, artists and arts managers as masters of interspaces. What does it mean? Today, not only in Europe, artists who are not hired, let's say, for a theater or a museum are in a very difficult position because they have to find money to survive. They have to find new partners. And what we can observe is that not any longer artists are working together with people from a cultural environment. They're very often connected with new and different fields of our society, for example, with experts from the IT business, or with social workers, or with people dealing with environmental issues. So, for example, one of the project of the European Union, it's called Imagine 2020. It's a project about the relations between the arts and climate change. And a lot of interesting examples and projects came out of this approach. So therefore, in my research I was doing together with my colleague Patrick Föhl, we called the role of artists and art managers as masters of interspaces. I think this is very, very important to be clear that as artists we cannot any longer say that we are only dealing with the arts. Especially in your country, in Tunisia, you understand that there are a lot of political issues. You have to talk to ministries, you have to talk to the government, and you want to be independent. I think this is a term which is important for artists all over the world, to be free, to be independent, not to work for propaganda, because art is never propaganda. Art is something which needs to be protected, which needs to have an own space, but on the other hand, arts need partners and need support, and this must not be a contradiction. So we can also state here that freelancers are always also working as cultural managers. That doesn't mean that they have to be totally informed about the basics of economics, but they have to organize their work, and they have to work together with different players and members of the society. And this is a special skill. So perhaps we can look on the next slide. You see here some terms. I wrote for you what could be the role of an artist in this sense I was trying to describe. So you are an enabler and a servant, a facilitator, a translator and connector, and a creator. And you see that this work runs through different parts of the society. Here in Germany, for example, we have that big discussion that a lot of artists say, we need support from the government. They have to give us money. And sometimes the government gives money for certain projects. But you can imagine it is not the role of the state, and it doesn't make sense that the state pays for culture. When we compare it to the United States, there we can see a completely different approach. It is more market-orientated, and it's more about the issues which bring, the artistic issues which bring together different people and different supporters who thinks that could be an interesting idea or this is relevant and important. So I don't think, or I think the solution is somewhere in the middle. Yeah, of course, it is important that the state supports the arts. Yeah, without any governmental money, it wouldn't be possible to have a real diverse field of the arts. On the other hand, artists should always reflect to be independent, not to wait for the next funding money, but also to have ideas how to express their ideas in a way that they are independent. Okay, perhaps we can go to the next slide. So, there are perhaps three very elementary aspects we can observe in European projects, and I think they could be also very interesting for Tunisia. So at the beginning, there's always an idea. An idea means what is actually my artistic innovation? What is the unique thing within my art? You can imagine we have, for example, in Germany, especially here in Berlin, hundreds of film festivals. So would it make sense to organize the 101 film festival? Or would it be perhaps more interesting to think about a festival about the combination of the digital arts and movies? Or we have here in Berlin a big literature festival. And what we can observe year by year is that they discover new places where they organize readings. So the next important point is the place. So very often here in Berlin, readings take place in the center of the city, yeah, or in areas where well-educated people live. And over a long period of time, there was an assumption, okay, actually only the well-educated people will go to reading. But it's not true, because we can see in the last year, the festival organized readings in the outskirts, in an area where you find skyscrapers and people who are not very wealthy. And it was a test, and it was quite successful, because the place was different. And even people from the center went to the outskirts, because they thought, okay, perhaps I can find an interesting new literary voice, but I can also discover a new place of my city, and I can perhaps also meet a different kind of audience. So the place is a second very, very important factor if we speak about the work of freelancers, especially when you try to come in contact with new partners. So for example, there are, I'm quite sure, also in Tunisia, a lot of places where perhaps until now no cultural events took place. Why not start to ask these people, go to a bakery or go to a hairdresser salon or go to the airport, yeah? This also has an effect on the arts. You will see, let's say, a reading on an airport transforms the text, transforms the perception of the text. So place is a very important thing. And last but not least, the narrative. What is a narrative? A narrative is not a marketing slogan. We're not talking here about marketing, we're not talking about advertisement. A narrative is a kind of a story where you try to catch the attention of people, to make clear what is actually interesting in your project. Yeah, because very often what we observe here in Berlin, artists have wonderful projects and very interesting, but very often it's difficult for them to explain the unique point. And you know, in the time of the digital age we live in, where people every day get thousands of information through Facebook or social platforms, you don't have, unfortunately, so much time to tell your story. So what we need is to have a very condensed narrative which delivers the complexity of your idea on the one hand, but on the other hand spreads the information. So for example, if I would invite you to a reading, let's say on an airport, or to a concert like we had here in one of the catacombs of Berlin, it was an opera by Mozart, yeah, played in one of these old cellars of the town, then this was an interesting narrative for people who perhaps would be not interested in a Mozart opera, but who thought, okay, this could be interesting to discover this place. And in the end, you know, it's not about making an event or to impress people by cheap effects. It's of course about artistic quality. This is always in the middle. But how to bring people to a concert, to an opera, to a reading, who are probably have prejudices against this artistic format. Here we have to use probably a narrative. So sometimes it can be very helpful to concentrate on these three key factors. Yeah. Another very important point, which is connected to these three aspects, is visibility. So being visible, using networks to inform people about your work. A second point is empowerment. I'm working together with the already mentioned freelancers here from Berlin right now on a refugee project. And what we try to do is not just to bring them to theaters or going to museums with them. We are trying to enable them to participate, to bring in their own ideas, to exchange their Arabic background and experiences and aesthetics with the aesthetics of the Germans. So this is a transcultural encounter. Empowerment, I think, is a very, very important term because it is not any longer one-dimensional that you have here the artist and there you have the audience just listening and then clapping with the hands. In our times, in postmodern times, I think interaction and participation are key terms. Neutrality. This could be interesting, especially for your country. We know that politics in the Arabic world play a completely different role as in Europe. So it's much stronger, the parties are stronger, there are very often, you know, interconnections between the ministries and between certain players of the society. And I hear that from a lot of artists from the Arabic world and from North Africa telling me, oh, sometimes it's really hard to deal with politicians who actually don't have so much experience with the arts, but who are responsible for the arts. Yeah? Here is important not to, I think, just to criticize politicians, but perhaps it's a better way to convince them that the field of the art should be neutral. Otherwise, as I have already said, if art is used for propaganda, it's worthless. Yeah, it's not interesting, and you will never reach an international level if critics understand, okay, this kind of art is just, you know, closely linked to ideas of the government. Yeah, but one more time, I don't think it's the right way just to criticize politicians. Very often, politicians are open-minded and want to also learn something. And I know that a lot of politicians also join the conference, so and I think this is a good sign, yeah, to learn from each other. And creativity, I think this is a term I don't have to explain. I'm quite sure, and I know it from a lot of artistic projects from Tunisia, that you are a country with wonderful artists and with wonderful projects, so I think creativity is something you already have in a very broad sense. Strategic thinking. This could be for you an interesting term, especially for freelancers, because what we see is that very often freelancers jump from project to project, yeah? And very often they think, okay, who is funding what kind of topic right now, because then I have to send the application that I get the money. Strategic thinking means to develop art projects not only from day by day, but to have a concept which lasts perhaps a bit longer than 2 weeks or 1 year, so that you can really become visible because you believe in an idea which you can express in a lot of projects, not only in a single one. So now we talked about theory. For example, to finish this, if you are interested to read about more theoretical stuff, I can recommend one of my books. It's published at the Springer publishing house. It's called Exporting Culture. It's about European positions, but also could be interesting for you, the German sociologist Dirk Becker, who wrote about cultural policy as a policy which can be helpful for the whole of the society. So if you're interested, just contact me and I can send you or the managers from the conference some more links. So let's switch now to the practical part of our short presentation. Perhaps we can go back one more time. You see here an example from the Mediterranean world, from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, from your point of view. This is a project from Athens. And I chose it just to explain the parameters I gave to you in a concrete project. You know that Greece is facing right now a tremendous crisis. And as always in a crisis, the first cut is in the field of culture. And that happened also in Greece. So there was no money for culture any longer. And what you see here, this is Manolis Manouzakis. He's a composer. Actually, he's writing music. Yeah, this is his job as an artist. But he's also a master of interspaces. And he was looking for new partners. And what he did was quite fascinating. He was choosing an area of Athens. It's called Neokosmos. It's not a touristical area. A lot of migrants live there, and poor people, and a lot of also Christian churches, and I think there's also a mosque. And he was composing for every street pieces of music. And he was conducting interviews with people who lived there. And then he put together this material, and he was looking for a partner, and this was the Onassis Center, an art center in Athens, and a telecompany, a kind of telecom, a company for mobile phones. And they developed together with him a system through GPS where you can use the material when you have a smartphone. That means if you go to the Onassis Center, then you can download on your smartphone this app. And then you walk through the streets, and through GPS, you listen to the music by Manolis Manouzakis. And you hear the interviews. And you discover this area in a completely new way. So, this project wouldn't have been possible without a strong partner from the IT world, without the financial support, and of course it's also an advertisement for them. But it's in the artistic concept, totally independent, and it is not presented on a classical stage. It is in the middle of a very, let's say, normal place, but you can have a completely new access to the music, to the poetry of the people who live there, to their daily life, and also you can be aware of a very fascinating space of Athens. So, quite fascinating. So you see here, it's about visibility. It's also about empowerment, because the people in that area understood for the first time that they're not just living in a poor place, that there's something valuable, that there's something beautiful in their surroundings. So it is also about participation, visibility, yeah? And it's also, one could say, strategic thinking, because this can be a stimuli for other parts and other cities to do something similar. Next slide, please. So, And therefore, I would say, perhaps when we go one more time back to theory, we can say, in Middle Europe, we're often talking about a concept-based approach, so that we have at first a concept, and then we're doing the work on the basis of the concept. Patricia Dewey and Bill Flood from the United States speak about the issue network. They say perhaps it's more interesting to speak about issues you can find, for example, in such a place like Neokosmos, and to follow the issues and to find money for the issues and not just trusting in a concept. Okay, next slide, please. So a last example is also from Europe, from Eastern Europe. This is from Slovakia. The woman you see here is Ilja van Ooyen. She came to Košice as a Dutch photographer. And she found out that they once had there a wonderful old traditional market. And you know, after the fall of the wall and the Iron Curtain, all these old markets disappeared and supermarkets came up, and this was the new thing. To make it short, she was interviewing people, she was asking inhabitants of the city of Košice, and she was talking to other artists from different fields. And then she suggested to reopen this old market, but with artistic goods, but to let people participate, to let them remind of the history, of their city. And perhaps in the next picture, you can see here this very lively atmosphere on this old market of Košice. Yeah? So, especially for freelancers, it can be very helpful not only to look of the resources you have inside yourself, inside your own network, the circles of your friends, but perhaps really to think about new networks, new partners, about participation. Because Manolis Manusakis, Ilja van Ooyen, they're working as freelancers. They're not hired by the UNESCO Center or by the city of Košice. They did it on the basis of their own ideas. But in the end, they found money and they found support. But they always said, in the middle of all our efforts is artistic quality, and there are the parameters like participation, visibility, empowerment, and interconnectivity. So, when we talk at last about perhaps a network, then we can see that we can speak here about community networks. So, a freelancer should be able to say something or to reflect the power of communities and of community building. Because there you can find trust circles, there you can find people who support you, and where you decide who you are trusting and who you are not trusting. Yeah? And you implement the parameters of trust. And this is perhaps much more interesting than always to rely on the state. Yeah? But the state can be one partner in this community. Officials, authorities can be partners if you can convince them that it is good for them and good for you if we work together in, let's say, in circles and not in this classical bottom-up idea. There's one guy having the money, having the power, saying what is happening. This is not any longer working, or it just worked 1 year and then, it's not sustainable. So, therefore, we can say cultural policy, and I address this to the politicians here, should be transformed into approaches of governance. Governance is a term where you share power, ideas, and competencies with the people you have, not only from the artistic field. That also means to bring in people from the economy, from education, from the social environment. Yeah? This is an important task for politicians today, to bring them together, because then people trust you also as politicians when they see you're really engaged. You're not just protecting your own power. You are protecting the interests of the people you have voted for you. And I think this is also, on the long run, a sustainable political concept. But if we look on the freelancers, we can see that politics is not just, a term we should use in front of politicians. Policy, the term policy, comes from the old ancient Greek term polis. And the polis was not only the name for the city, it was the name for an idea of people working together, sharing together certain ideas, and creating a trust circle. And actually this very old dimension of the world, politics, perhaps we could keep in mind and refresh in a way. So here I brought to you some lists, and now I want to invite my colleagues working together with me, Mafalda Sandrini, Rossella Sassillo and Alan Tabakovic. They helped me preparing this lecture, and unfortunately we don't have the time to speak about your experiences as freelancers from very different fields, from the field of journalism and the arts, from the field of music and the arts, from the field of how to enable refugees in the artistic sector. But we hope that we can see us all together in October, and that we then have the possibility to work really interactively together and to see us from face to face, because we believe, although we are happy to live in a digital world, the human contact and the direct interaction is something which is, especially in the arts, still very, very important. A warm hello from Berlin. Enjoy the conference, and hopefully we keep in contact. Thank you very much.